"We're streamlining operations," Chadwick Vance III announced, making no move to offer me a seat. His tone was clipped, dismissive. My father's era had its place, but Vance Industries needs to be agile now. He gestured vaguely around the office that had belonged to his father, Mr. Vance, until just last week. "Frankly, Ava, your role is viewed as a cost center we can no longer justify. Effective immediately, your position is eliminated." I stared across the large mahogany desk at the 30-year-old who had been CEO for precisely 6 hours and 43 minutes. Barely enough time for the ink to dry on his promotion, let alone understand the company he now led. The ostentatious Sterling Business School diploma hanging behind him still had a piece of the protective plastic clinging stubbornly to the corner of its gaudy frame, a silent testament to his rushed ascent. "I understand," I replied, my voice remarkably steady, betraying none of the icy shock that shot through me. 9 years. 9 years of dedicating my skills, my knowledge, my very lifeblood to Vance Industries, reduced to a curt, impersonal dismissal delivered in under 30 seconds. All those late nights, the high-stakes negotiations I'd salvaged, the millions I'd saved the company through meticulous contract reviews, apparently. None of it mattered now. It was just overhead. "May I inquire as to the specific reasons for this decision?" I asked, keeping my tone level, professional. Chadwick's lips twisted into something that might pass for a confident smirk on someone with actual confidence. On him, it looked brittle. "My father might have felt he needed someone to hold his hand through every complex negotiation, Ava," he said, leaning back in the oversized leather chair that still seemed too big for him. "But I have a different, more modern vision for Vance Industries." He waved a hand dismissively. "We're embracing a leaner structure, cutting redundancies, focusing on maximizing shareholder value." He spouted the buzzwords like he'd memorized them from a textbook, devoid of any real understanding of their application. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. The weight of the thick personnel files I'd been meticulously reviewing just before his assistant summoned me suddenly feeling heavier. Files that contained, with a bitter twist of irony, my own carefully negotiated, ironclad executive severance agreement. The very document designed to protect me from exactly this kind of capricious action. "I will require this termination in writing, of course, Chadwick," I said, my voice firm as I rose smoothly from the visitor's chair. The chair I'd sat in countless times discussing strategy with his father, Mr. Vance. Chadwick waved a dismissive hand towards the door, already swiveling his chair back to face his gleaming new computer monitor. "Eleanor Vance in HR will have the standard paperwork for you to sign on your way out, Moreau." He used my last name, a subtle but clear power play, emphasizing my new status as an outsider. "Standard procedure dictates security will escort you while you clear out your personal belongings from your desk." He delivered the lines flatly, as if reading from a script. "It's just business." I gathered my notepad and pen, my movements measured and unhurried. My years navigating complex legal battles and tense negotiations had taught me the power of maintaining composure. Especially when internally I felt a storm brewing. A cold fury mixed with a sharp, clarifying sense of purpose. "Of course," I replied coolly. "Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to Vance Industries over the past 9 years. A flicker of confusion, perhaps annoyance at my lack of visible distress, crossed Chadwick's face. But he quickly smoothed it over with another of his practiced, hollow smiles. "Best of luck, Moreau," he said, his eyes already back on his screen, dismissing me completely. As the security guard stood by, looking distinctly uncomfortable while I methodically packed the few personal items from my desk into a plain cardboard box. My phone vibrated silently in my pocket. A stream of messages from Isabella and other colleagues who must have witnessed my unceremonious exit from the executive floor. Concern, shock, questions I couldn't yet answer. I ignored them, focusing completely on the task at hand, compartmentalizing the shock and the burgeoning anger. There, tucked away in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old compliance manuals, was my salvation. My copy of the Executive Severance Agreement, or ESA. The one Mr. Vance himself had insisted on, revising it personally 3 years ago when Apex Solutions, our biggest competitor, had tried aggressively to poach me with an offer that had made my eyes water. Mr. Vance knew my value, even if his son clearly did not. "All set, Ms. Moreau?" The security guard asked awkwardly, shifting his weight. He knew me, of course. Everyone who worked at Vance for more than a few months knew Ava Moreau, the unofficial problem solver. The one you called when deals went sideways or regulations threatened to derail a project. The one who, until 10 minutes ago, had been considered Mr. Vance's right hand. Almost, I said calmly, sliding the thick vellum envelope containing the ESA into my leather briefcase, ensuring it was secure. It felt solid, substantial, a shield against the storm. Just need to say a quick goodbye to a few people on my team. But I didn't. There was nothing left to say right now. My actions would speak louder than any parting words. I walked, head held high, straight past the stunned, sympathetic faces of my legal team gathered near the elevators. Their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. I offered them a tight, reassuring nod I didn't entirely feel. Then stepped into the waiting elevator and descended from the executive floor for the last time as an employee. Out into the crisp, bright morning air of Cedar Creek, the familiar cityscape suddenly looking different, charged with a new, uncertain energy. Once inside the quiet sanctuary of my car, parked in my usual spot in the executive lot, a privilege soon to be revoked. I noted wryly, I finally allowed myself a single, deep, shuddering breath. The mask of calm composure cracked for just a moment. Reaching into my briefcase, I pulled out the ESA. My fingers traced the familiar embossed logo of Vance Industries on the cover before I opened it. Flipping directly to the section I knew almost by heart. Page 8, Section 5. The clause Mr. Vance had insisted upon, the language I had helped draft and negotiate with painstaking precision, ensuring every word, every comma, served its purpose. Protection. Consequences. Leverage. A slow, cold smile spread across my face, erasing the last vestiges of shock. It was replaced by a steely resolve. Chadwick Vance III, in his arrogant haste to remake the company in his own image, had just made the single most expensive mistake of his incredibly short and likely turbulent career as CEO. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. My journey with Vance Industries began 9 years earlier, when I was a sharp, ambitious 29-year-old. Fresh out of a top state university's law school, degree earned through scholarships and sheer determination. I was hungry to prove myself, to carve out a place based on merit, not connections. With a laser focus on contract law, I'd sent applications to every significant company in Cedar Creek that might value someone obsessive about the fine print. Mr. Vance, Arthur Vance Sr. himself, had personally interviewed me. He wasn't looking for a yes man, he was looking for someone with backbone. He'd been impressed, he told me later, by my refusal to gloss over potentially problematic clauses in a sample agreement he'd given me. By my willingness to ask tough questions. Most lawyers these days just seem to rubber stamp whatever legalese we put in front of them, he had grumbled during that final interview. His shrewd eyes assessing me over his reading glasses. They're afraid to rock the boat. He leaned forward slightly. I need someone on my team, Ava, who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm about to step right into a mess I don't see coming. Someone who reads the damn details. I was hired the very next day. And over the subsequent 9 years, I became far more than just a senior manager in the legal department, specializing in contracts. I became Mr. Vance's go-to problem solver, his troubleshooter. I was the first call he made when a critical supplier threatened to walk away during tense negotiations. When a multi-million-dollar client dispute escalated. When the company faced navigating a labyrinth of complex new federal regulations that could cripple operations. I didn't just review agreements, I rewrote them, closing loopholes, adding protections, saving Vance Industries millions over the years. I spotted ambiguities that could have cost the company dearly in litigation. Slowly, steadily, through hard work and results, I earned not just his trust, but a place as his unofficial right hand. A confidant on critical strategic decisions. Then, 3 years ago, Apex Solutions, Vance's most aggressive competitor, came calling. They tried to lure me away with a staggering salary and a vice president title that was undeniably tempting. It wasn't just about the money, it was the recognition. Mr. Vance didn't just counter their offer, he exceeded it in ways that spoke volumes about how much he valued my loyalty and contributions. He presented me with the executive severance agreement, the ESA. It wasn't just about matching the pay, it included a full year's severance pay at my then current salary. immediate vesting of all my outstanding stock options, a crucial waiver of the standard non-compete clause, and, most importantly, the trigger clause, a substantial payout, $350,000, if I was ever terminated without cause. It was an extraordinary package, a golden shield. "You're practically family now, Ava," Mr. Vance had said warmly. His gaze direct and sincere as we both signed the meticulously drafted document in his office. He clapped me lightly on the shoulder. "This company, Vance Industries, wouldn't be where it is today without your sharp mind and steady hand. This agreement reflects that reality." I believed him. And for the next 3 years, I continued to pour everything I had into Vance Industries, safeguarding its interests, helping it grow. Then came the announcement that shook the foundations of the company: Mr. Vance was retiring. We all knew, with a sinking sense of inevitability, that Chadwick Vance III would take over. Nepotism, it seemed, was alive and well, even within a company Mr. Vance had built, at least in theory, on the principle of meritocracy. What none of us anticipated, however, was the sheer speed and ruthlessness with which Chadwick would begin asserting his authority. Eager to dismantle his father's legacy and replace it with his own unproven ideas. In the uneasy weeks leading up to Mr. Vance's last official day, I had felt Chadwick's eyes on me during executive meetings. His expression was coolly calculating, assessing. He exuded an air of impatient ambition mixed with deep-seated insecurity. When I presented the quarterly compliance report, carefully highlighting several potential legal and financial risks the company urgently needed to address, Chadwick had openly dismissed my concerns. He labeled my meticulous analysis as excessive caution and old-fashioned thinking that was stifling innovation and holding the company back from achieving its full potential. Mr. Vance had firmly defended my thoroughness, reminding Chadwick that my caution had saved them from disaster more than once. But I saw the condescending smirk linger on Chadwick's face. I recognized the resentment in his eyes. The writing wasn't just on the wall, it was practically etched in stone. Chadwick viewed me not as a valuable asset, but as a relic of his father's reign, an obstacle to his grand, undefined vision. I wasn't his right hand, and that was intolerable to him. I had discreetly started updating my resume that very night, sensing the inevitable storm gathering on the horizon. What I hadn't expected, what truly blindsided me, was the sheer, brutal abruptness of my dismissal. No warning signs beyond his general demeanor. No transition plan offered. Not even the thinnest pretense of a strategic restructuring or performance review. Just a cold, blunt, "Your position is eliminated," from a young man who had inherited everything his father had painstakingly built over decades, yet seemed to understand none of its true value. As I drove away from the Vance Industries complex, the Cedar Creek skyline blurring slightly through unshed tears of frustration and anger. Leaving behind the office that had been my professional home for nearly a decade, I couldn't help but wonder, had Chadwick even bothered to read my personnel file? Had anyone warned him about the meticulously crafted ESA before he so casually decided my fate with the flick of a pen? Or had his arrogance simply blinded him to the potential consequences? That evening, in the quiet solitude of my home office, I spread the documents across my polished desk. The termination notice Eleanor Vance's office had hastily printed, complete with a glaring typo in my last name, lay beside the heavy, imposing original of my executive severance agreement. The contrast was stark, almost laughable in its symbolism. One, a flimsy, generic form filled out with careless haste, the other, a fortress of legal protection, meticulously crafted over weeks of intense negotiation, signed and sealed by the founder himself. One represented the impulsive act of an insecure successor, the other, the considered wisdom of an experienced leader. My resolve hardened. This wasn't just an insult, it was a breach of faith, a violation of a promise made by the man who built this company. I picked up my phone, my fingers dialing a number I knew well. A number I hadn't expected to call quite so soon, or under these circumstances. "Julian Croft," answered the familiar, smooth voice on the other end after the second ring. Sharp, strategic, always several moves ahead. "Julian, it's Ava Moreau." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause, then his voice warmed slightly. "Ava. This is a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure?" He cut straight to the chase, as always. How are things over at Vance Industries? Keeping the new regime on its toes? I took a steadying breath, marshaling my thoughts, choosing my words with care. Actually, Julian, that's precisely why I'm calling. There's been a development. As of this afternoon, I am no longer with Vance Industries. I was terminated today. Silence hung on the line for a beat, longer than Julian usually allowed. You're kidding, he finally said, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. Terminated? Arthur Vance fired you? After all these years? I find that hard to believe. No, not Mr. Vance, I corrected him calmly. Chadwick. His son. The new CEO. Mr. Vance retired last week, remember? Another pause, longer this time, pregnant with unspoken understanding. Julian knew the industry dynamics, the personalities involved. He could likely picture the scenario playing out. Ah, he said slowly. I see. A wealth of meaning packed into those two simple syllables. Well, Ava. Chadwick's considerable loss is undoubtedly going to be someone else's significant gain. His voice shifted subtly, the hunter sensing an opportunity. As a matter of fact, Apex has been looking to bolster our strategic team, and someone with your unique skill set. Before you continue, Julian, I interrupted smoothly, taking control of the narrative. You should probably know something. My departure comes with certain contractual benefits. I have a rather comprehensive executive severance agreement with Vance Industries, containing some fairly significant termination provisions. Oh. Intrigued now, his voice sharpened with professional interest. Do tell, Ava. Don't spare the details. I walked him through the key points of the ESA, my voice even and precise, the full year of severance pay. The immediate vesting of all my Vance stock options, the complete waiver of the non-compete clause upon termination without cause, and the piece de resistance, the $350,000 cash payout triggered by my dismissal. Julian let out a low whistle when I finished. Good Lord, Ava. That's not just a parachute, that's a platinum-lined escape pod. He sounded genuinely impressed, maybe even a little envious. Does young Chadwick have any earthly idea what he's just triggered by showing you the door? Honestly, Julian? I highly doubt he even bothered to check the contents of my file before making his move. My voice was dry. His focus seemed to be entirely on a modernizing and a streamlining thought. Well, Julian mused, the strategic wheels clearly turning in his mind. This timing is exceptionally interesting. As you know, Apex Solutions is actively looking to expand our footprint here in the Cedar Creek market. Acquiring someone with your unparalleled, intimate knowledge of Vance Industries contracts, their key client vulnerabilities, and their internal operational weaknesses, that would be quite the strategic coup. A genuine smile finally touched my lips, cold but satisfied. This was the opening I needed. I thought you might see it that way, Julian. We talked for nearly an hour after that, the conversation shifting quickly from sympathy to strategic planning. We discussed potential senior roles at Apex, compensation packages that dwarfed my Vance salary even before the severance, and exactly how my deep understanding of Vance's operations, gleaned entirely legally through my years of service, could provide Apex Solutions with a significant, immediate competitive advantage. By the time we disconnected the call, I had a firm verbal offer for the position of Director of Contract Management and Compliance at Apex, with a formal written offer promised by morning. The proposed salary alone was nearly double what I had been earning at Vance. I leaned back in my chair, the initial shock and sting of the termination now replaced by a surge of adrenaline and a clear path forward. The dismissal, while personally insulting, had inadvertently become a catalyst. It was an unexpected, potentially lucrative opportunity, one that would never have materialized if Chadwick Vance III had possessed even a fraction of his father's prudence or taken 5 minutes to understand the value and the contractual obligations associated with the employee he had so carelessly cast aside. My phone buzzed again on the desk. A text message from Isabella, my former assistant at Vance, her loyalty apparently overriding any fear of the new regime. Ava, are you okay? The multiple question marks conveyed her panic. Everyone here is in total shock. We can't believe it. Another message popped up immediately after. Heard Mr. Vance is furious. He's cutting his retirement cruise short. Flying back tomorrow morning. I hadn't expected that development. Mr. Vance was supposed to be sailing somewhere in the Caribbean for a month, celebrating a lifetime of hard work. For him to abandon that, it meant Chadwick must have informed him, likely minimizing his own role in the debacle. Or perhaps word had simply traveled fast through the company grapevine. Mr. Vance wouldn't stand for this. "I'm fine, Isabella," I typed back quickly, wanting to reassure her. Just surprised by the timing and the method. Understatement of the year. Her reply was instantaneous. "Chadwick just called a mandatory all-hands meeting for tomorrow afternoon." Subject: announcing a bold new direction for Vance Industries. Another message followed. "Rumor is he told the VPs he's cleaning house and bringing in his own team to shake things up. So, that confirmed it. It wasn't just about me. Chadwick wasn't just trimming perceived fat, he was performing radical surgery without understanding the patient's anatomy. He was recklessly dismantling the very foundations his father had spent decades building, piece by painful piece. Likely alienating loyal employees and jeopardizing valuable relationships in the process. His arrogance was matched only by his ignorance. Keep me posted on any major developments, if you can," I texted back, then deliberately set my phone aside, screen down. Enough drama for one day. I carefully gathered the ESA and the termination notice, placing them neatly side by side in a new, unmarked folder. Tomorrow promised to be very interesting indeed. But almost certainly not in the way Chadwick Vance III anticipated. He thought he was decisively asserting his control, marking his territory as the new alpha. In reality, blinded by ego, he had just handed me the master key to unlock a future I hadn't even planned on pursuing. Potentially crippling his own company in the process. His reign was starting with a self-inflicted wound of massive proportions. I arrived at the gleaming glass and steel headquarters of Vance Industries just after 9 the next morning. Not as Ava Moreau, loyal senior manager and problem solver, but as Ava Moreau, recently terminated employee with significant unfinished business and a powerful contractual shield. Chloe Jenkins, the young woman at the main reception desk, did a visible double-take as I walked confidently through the revolving glass doors. Dressed in the same impeccable professional attire I had worn every workday for the past 9 years. My heels clicked purposefully on the polished marble floor. "Ms. Moreau," she stammered, her eyes wide with confusion. "I thought. I mean, Mr. Vance's office announced yesterday, we heard." Her voice trailed off, unsure how to proceed. "Good morning, Chloe," I said calmly, offering her a polite but distant smile. "Is Mr. Vance Sr. in the building this morning?" Her eyes widened further, confirming Isabella's message. "Yes. Yes, he arrived very early," she whispered conspiratorially, leaning forward slightly. "Caused quite a stir. He went straight up to the executive floor. He's with Mr. Chadwick Vance in the main conference room right now." She hesitated, biting her lip. "But Ms. Moreau, I really don't think you should." "Thank you, Chloe," I interrupted gently but firmly, already moving toward the secure elevator bank. "I have a meeting." I didn't wait for her response, my stride confident, my purpose clear. As the elevator doors slid open silently onto the plushly carpeted executive floor, the sound hit me immediately. Shouting. Angry shouting, echoing down the quiet hallway. Mr. Vance's voice, usually so measured and controlled, was raised in fury, tight with a palpable sense of betrayal and disbelief. "Did you even bother to read her executive severance agreement before you fired her, Chadwick?" The words reverberated off the polished wood paneling. "Do you have any idea what that woman has done for this company? The messes she's cleaned up? The loyalty she's shown?" I approached the main conference room slowly, deliberately. A small, uncomfortable cluster of senior executives and executive assistants hovered near the hallway junction, pretending to be engrossed in conversation or examining artwork on the walls, but all clearly straining to overhear the explosive confrontation unfolding behind the closed conference room doors. Isabella spotted me first. Her eyes grew impossibly wide, mirroring Chloe's reaction downstairs. She quickly detached herself from the anxious group and hurried towards me, her expression a mixture of alarm and morbid curiosity. "Ava. Oh my God, what are you doing here?" she whispered urgently, grabbing my arm. "You shouldn't be here." I have a meeting, Isabella, I stated simply, my voice calm. A meeting? With who? She hissed, glancing nervously towards the conference room door, from which the sounds of Mr. Vance's tirade were still clearly audible, though slightly muffled now. Chadwick is in there getting the lecture of a lifetime from his father. It's brutal. She leaned closer. Apparently, Mr. Vance cut his retirement cruise short the second he heard what Chadwick did yesterday. He flew all night. He is livid. I nodded slowly, unsurprised. That sounded exactly like the Arthur Vance Sr. I knew. Decisive, fiercely protective of his company and the people he valued, and possessing a formidable temper when provoked. Despite his official retirement, he wasn't the type to simply sail off into the sunset while the ship he built was being steered towards an iceberg by his own inexperienced son. Suddenly, the heavy oak conference room door flew open with violent force, crashing against the interior wall. Chadwick stormed out, his face flushed a deep, blotchy red with fury and humiliation. The anger quickly morphed into stunned disbelief, his color draining rapidly, when he saw me standing there, calm and composed, directly in his path. Moreau, he sputtered, momentarily speechless. What in the hell are you doing here? He finally demanded, his voice tight with outrage. Before I could utter a single word, Mr. Vance appeared in the doorway behind his son. His face was grim, etched with disappointment, but unlike Chadwick, his expression softened slightly, almost imperceptibly, into something akin to relief upon seeing me. The cavalry had arrived, even if he hadn't explicitly summoned it. Ava, Mr. Vance said, his voice regaining its familiar authoritative calm, though underscored with steel. Perfect timing. He ignored his son completely. Please join us. We have some matters to discuss regarding your employment status. He gestured pointedly for me to enter the conference room. Then, he turned his steely gaze upon the small, eavesdropping crowd still lingering in the hallway. The rest of you, he commanded curtly, his voice leaving no room for argument, find something productive to do. Back to work. Now. The executives and assistants scattered instantly, like startled pigeons. Inside the spacious conference room, the long, polished table was strewn with papers. Prominently displayed amidst the clutter were, I noted with grim satisfaction, several copies of my executive severance agreement. Sitting rigidly at the far end of the table was Eleanor Vance, the VP of Human Resources and a distant cousin of the Vances. She looked exceptionally uncomfortable, caught squarely between the furious founder and the floundering new CEO, a precarious position for anyone, let alone family. Ms. Vance was just attempting to explain to Chadwick, Mr. Vance said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he firmly closed the door behind us, shutting out the rest of the floor, why his unilateral decision to terminate your employment yesterday might present certain significant financial and legal complications for Vance Industries. Eleanor cleared her throat nervously, adjusting her glasses. She avoided meeting my eyes or Chadwick's glare. Yes, as I was explaining, Mr. Vance. Chadwick, the executive severance agreement that Ms. Moreau signed 3 years ago, which you co-signed, Mr. Vance, included several key protective clauses, specifically pertaining to termination without cause, including, I know precisely what my agreement includes, Eleanor, I interjected smoothly, cutting through her hesitant explanation. All eyes turned to me. I stood tall, meeting Chadwick's hostile gaze directly, then shifting to Mr. Vance with respect, before finally glancing briefly at Eleanor. Allow me to summarize. I paused for effect, letting the silence hang for a moment. 1 full year of severance pay, calculated at my current base salary and bonus structure. My voice was clear, unwavering. Immediate and full vesting of all outstanding Vance Industries stock options previously granted to me. I continued, ticking off the points methodically. A complete and total waiver of the standard non-compete clause, effective immediately upon termination without cause. And, crucially, I paused again, making absolutely certain Chadwick Vance III was looking directly at me, forcing him to acknowledge the reality of his blunder, a one-time early termination payout of $350,000. Due within 30 days, as this termination was clearly initiated without documented cause. Chadwick's face contorted through a rapid, ugly cycle of emotions, first, indignant disbelief, then flushed anger, morphing quickly into wide-eyed barely concealed panic as the staggering financial implications began to sink in. That can't possibly be right, he stammered, lunging for one of the copies of the ESA scattered on the table. His hands fumbling with the pages. That's outrageous. It's impossible. Page 8, Section 5, Chadwick, I offered calmly, helpfully even. You might want to review the specific language your father and I agreed upon. Mr. Vance watched his son's frantic scrabbling with a heavy sigh. A profound mixture of deep disappointment and weary resignation settling onto his features. He looked older, suddenly burdened by his son's incompetence. I tried, Chadwick, he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. I tried repeatedly to teach you the critical importance of understanding the details, of reading the fine print. Before making irreversible decisions. He gestured towards me and the damning document in his son's trembling hands. This right here is exactly why. Due diligence matters. Chadwick finally located the correct clause, his finger tracing the words, his face growing progressively paler, almost ashen, as he absorbed the legally binding text. But this is. He trailed off, unable to articulate the magnitude of his error. Legally binding, I finished for him crisply. Signed by Mr. Vance himself, as chairman and CEO at the time, and still very much valid and enforceable. Mr. Vance turned his attention fully back to me then, his expression softening considerably, lines of apology etched around his eyes. Ava, he said, his voice sincere. On behalf of Vance Industries, and myself personally, I want to formally apologize for my son's rash and utterly unprofessional actions yesterday. He glared momentarily at Chadwick, who refused to meet his father's eyes. Your termination is hereby rescinded, effective immediately. Consider it null and void. He offered a small, conciliatory smile. Your position, your office, your responsibilities, your compensation, everything will be fully restored. It will be as if yesterday never happened. I had anticipated this, of course. It was the logical, honorable move for Mr. Vance to make. He was nothing if not fiercely loyal to those who had served him and his company well over the years. His sense of fairness was one of the reasons I had stayed so long. But loyalty, or the restoration of my previous position under his now proven incompetent son, wasn't what had brought me back to Vance Industries this morning. Things had changed irrevocably. I sincerely appreciate the offer, Mr. Vance, I said respectfully, and I appreciate your apology. However, I paused, letting my words sink in, I must decline. Yesterday evening, I accepted a formal offer for a senior position elsewhere. The silence that descended upon the conference room following my announcement was absolute, broken only by the soft thud of Chadwick dropping the heavy pages of the ESA onto the polished table as if they had burned his fingers. Where? Mr. Vance asked quietly, his voice strained, though I suspected, given his industry connections and the speed at which news travels. He already knew the answer. Apex Solutions, I replied calmly, meeting his gaze directly. I spoke with Julian Croft last night. I start next Monday as their new Director of Contract Management and Compliance. Chadwick let out a sharp, incredulous bark of laughter, devoid of any humor. Apex? You can't work for Apex. That's our biggest competitor, he practically shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. Your non-compete clause. My non-compete clause was explicitly waived upon termination without cause, I reminded him coolly, cutting him off mid-sentence. As clearly stipulated in the executive severance agreement you just read. I paused, then added pointedly, perhaps you should consult page 10, section 7 for clarification. It seems prudent, Chadwick, for a CEO to be intimately familiar with his company's contractual obligations, especially concerning senior personnel. Mr. Vance sank heavily into one of the large leather chairs at the head of the table, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. The fight seemingly draining out of him. He ran a hand tiredly over his face. You've been planning this, Ava? He asked, a note of weariness, perhaps even hurt, in his voice. Leaving us for Apex all along? No, Mr. Vance, I said honestly, shaking my head. I assure you, I had not. My loyalty has always been to Vance Industries, and to you personally. But, I continued, my voice firming, when this unexpected opportunity presented itself yesterday, directly as a result of Chadwick's actions. I would have been professionally negligent and frankly, foolish, not to seriously consider it and ultimately accept. They'll want our confidential client list, our proprietary pricing structures, our strategic plans. Chadwick began again, panic rising sharply in his voice as the potential fallout dawned on him. She knows everything. I raised a single eyebrow, regarding him with disdain. Under normal circumstances, perhaps, I conceded coolly. However, given the specific manner in which my employment was terminated, abruptly, without cause, and in breach of my existing agreement, the legal ground regarding my use of general knowledge and skills acquired here is complex. I then turned my attention back to Mr. Vance, softening my tone slightly out of respect for our long association. However, I should assure you, Mr. Vance, that my employment agreement with Apex Solutions specifically includes a clause explicitly prohibiting me from bringing over or utilizing any confidential or proprietary information belonging to Vance Industries. Julian Croft may be a fierce competitor, I added, but he operates with a strong sense of professional ethics. He understands the boundaries. Mr. Vance nodded slowly, unsurprised. He and Julian Croft had a long history, decades of intense business rivalry, but underpinned by a grudging mutual respect and adherence to certain unwritten rules of engagement. He knew Julian wouldn't cross certain lines. He looked at me then, his gaze sharp and direct, cutting through the drama. What do you want, Ava? The blunt question caught me slightly off guard. Excuse me, I asked, stalling for a moment to gather my thoughts. You didn't have to come back here today, Mr. Vance elaborated patiently. You could have simply let your lawyers handle the ESA payout and started your new job at Apex quietly next week. Your presence here, now, suggests you want something more than just the money you're rightfully owed. He leaned forward slightly. So, I ask again. What is it you truly want? I considered his question carefully, letting the silence stretch. What did I want? Revenge against the arrogant young man who had tried to discard me like trash? The satisfaction of seeing him squirm under his father's wrath? A formal, groveling apology from Chadwick himself for the blatant disrespect and dismissal of 9 years of dedicated service? Yes, perhaps a measure of all those things flickered within me, buried beneath layers of professional control. But more than that, I want what I am legally and ethically owed according to my signed agreement, Mr. Vance, I said finally, my voice steady and clear. Every penny, every vested share. And, I added, my gaze shifting briefly to Chadwick, then back to his father, I want to ensure, as much as possible, that the dedicated, talented people who still work here, the people who are the backbone of this company, are treated with the respect and fairness they deserve moving forward. Chadwick scoffed loudly, unable to contain his indignation. Oh, please. This is a business, Moreau, not some kind of charity ward. Your father built this business into an industry leader precisely because he understood the value of his employees, I countered sharply, my voice hardening as I turned to face Chadwick directly. That's why Vance Industries historically boasts one of the lowest employee turnover rates in our sector. It's why your key suppliers remain loyal, even when competitors undercut their pricing slightly. It's why your most important clients trust Vance to deliver consistently, even under pressure, even when timelines seem impossible. That trust, Chadwick, is built on relationships and mutual respect, not just profit margins. Mr. Vance was watching me intently now, his expression thoughtful, analytical. You still care about this company, Ava, he observed quietly. It wasn't a question. I gave 9 years of my professional life to it, Mr. Vance, I acknowledged, my voice softening slightly. I helped build much of its current success alongside you. I would prefer not to see all that hard work, that legacy, carelessly undone in 9 short days due to impulsive leadership. Chadwick opened his mouth, likely to retort with another piece of MBA jargon, but Mr. Vance silenced him instantly with a single, sharp, cutting look that could have frozen fire. What exactly are you proposing, Ava? Mr. Vance asked, getting straight to the point. I reached into my briefcase and retrieved the folder I had prepared last night. I placed it firmly on the conference table between them. A structured, short-term consulting arrangement, I announced clearly. My proposal was ready. I am prepared to offer my expertise on a limited basis to ensure a smooth and orderly transition of my critical duties and knowledge. This would involve advising on key pending contracts currently in negotiation, providing essential insights on sensitive client relationships, and facilitating the handover of ongoing legal matters. I paused, letting the offer hang in the air before stating my terms. In return for these professional services, Vance Industries will fulfill all financial obligations stipulated in my ESA, the severance, the stock options, the termination payout, promptly and without dispute. Additionally, I added, my voice crisp and businesslike, Vance Industries will compensate me for my consulting time at an agreed-upon hourly rate, payable weekly. Mr. Vance picked up the folder, his expression unreadable now. He opened it and began skimming the concise, one-page proposal I had drafted. As he read, the barest hint of a small, almost imperceptible smile played at the corners of his mouth. He appreciated preparedness, strategic thinking. You've certainly thought this through, Ava, he murmured, looking up briefly. Thorough as always. It's precisely what you hired me for, Mr. Vance, I reminded him quietly. Attention to detail. Anticipating contingencies. He nodded slowly, then handed the folder across the table to his son, his expression hardening again. Chadwick. Read this. Carefully, this time. The implication was clear. Chadwick accepted the folder reluctantly, his expression sullen, resentful. He forced himself to read the proposal, his eyes scanning the text. I watched as his eyes widened slightly at certain points, likely the scope of work I was offering, and perhaps the proposed consulting fee. Despite his wounded pride and simmering anger, I knew he was intelligent enough, just barely, to recognize the immense strategic value of what I was offering, mitigating the damage he had caused, preventing further operational chaos, and potentially saving the company millions in lost deals or client defections. But this arrangement would effectively give her ongoing access to our internal operations, our strategies, he objected, grasping for leverage. Even while she's preparing to work for Apex. With strict, legally binding confidentiality provisions included, of course, I pointed out smoothly, anticipating his objection. The agreement clearly delineates what constitutes proprietary Vance information versus general industry knowledge and skills. Furthermore, I added preemptively, Julian Croft at Apex is fully aware of this proposed consulting arrangement and has already approved it conceptually. Mr. Vance looked genuinely impressed now. He raised an eyebrow. You've already discussed and cleared this potential consulting work with Apex? It was a non-negotiable condition of my acceptance of their offer this morning, Mr. Vance, I confirmed coolly. Apex gets my expertise going forward, but without the ethical complications or legal risks associated with improperly acquired information. It's a clean arrangement for all parties. Chadwick slammed the folder back down onto the table with unnecessary force, his face flushing red again. This is absolutely ridiculous. It's extortion. It's blackmail, he sputtered, losing control. No, Chadwick, Mr. Vance corrected him sharply, his voice cutting through his son's outburst like a knife. This is negotiation. His gaze bored into his son. Something you might actually understand if you had spent less time memorizing buzzwords at Sterling and more time actually learning the intricacies of the business your grandfather and I built. He paused, letting the rebuke land. This is the direct consequence of your own impulsive, ill-considered actions. The raw tension between father and son crackled in the air, thick and suffocating. Years of unspoken expectations, simmering resentment, and profound disappointment suddenly laid bare for all, including me, to witness. As the immense weight of the situation, the sheer magnitude of Chadwick's blunder, settled heavily over the room, Eleanor Vance seized the opportunity. She murmured a quiet, almost inaudible excuse about needing to check on urgent payroll matters and practically fled the conference room, leaving the three of us alone to deal with the messy aftermath of Chadwick's disastrous first day as CEO. I'll need some time, Ava, to formally review this proposal with legal, Mr. Vance said finally, closing the folder decisively. His tone was measured, back to business. Of course, Mr. Vance, I replied courteously. Please take the time you need. However, I added, my voice firm but respectful, I must make it clear that my offer to assist with this transition is time-sensitive. It expires at the close of business today, 5 p.m. After that deadline, I continued, meeting his gaze directly. Any further communication regarding the fulfillment of my ESA package will need to proceed exclusively through our respective attorneys. The implication was clear: cooperation now, or a potentially protracted and costly legal battle later. Chadwick's face reddened further, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. "Are you giving us an ultimatum, Moreau?" he demanded, his voice laced with disbelief and fury. "I'm being practical, Chadwick," I corrected him calmly, refusing to be drawn into an emotional argument. "My new senior position at Apex Solutions requires my full and immediate attention starting Monday. Apex has already been exceptionally generous and accommodating in allowing for the possibility of this brief consulting arrangement. I cannot, and will not, ask them to wait indefinitely while Vance Industries deliberates." Mr. Vance studied my face intently for a long moment, searching for something in my expression: lingering resentment, perhaps, or vindictiveness. A desire for revenge. Finding none, only professional resolve and a commitment to fairness, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "You were always fair, Ava," he said quietly, a note of respect in his voice. "Even when circumstances might have given you every reason not to be." He then turned abruptly to his son, his demeanor shifting back to stern authority. "Chadwick, step outside. Now. I need a private moment with Ava." Chadwick looked as though he wanted to argue, to assert his now shredded authority. But something in his father's unwavering gaze and iron tone stopped him cold. With a final, resentful glare shot in my direction, he turned stiffly and exited the conference room, pulling the door shut behind him with a loud, petulant slam that echoed his frustration. "He has potential," Mr. Vance said heavily once we were alone, the sound of the slammed door still hanging in the air. "He sounded weary, burdened. Somewhere deep down, perhaps. But he sorely lacks patience. And humility. Critical traits for any leader." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his thick silver hair. "I honestly hoped, that handing him the reins, forcing him into the deep end, would compel him to grow up, to mature. To learn responsibility." He shook his head slowly. "I see now, quite clearly, that promoting him so soon was a grave mistake. It's not my place to comment on your family decisions or your succession planning, Mr. Vance," I said carefully, maintaining a professional boundary. Mr. Vance offered a small, rueful smile. "Ah, yes. Always the diplomat, Ava. But let's be frank. We both know this disastrous situation isn't how either of us envisioned the end of the long and productive working relationship between Vance Industries and Ava Moreau." I felt an unexpected twinge of genuine nostalgia then, a momentary pang of sadness for the years I had invested in this company. The complex challenges we had overcome together, the hard-won victories we had celebrated side by side. "Business is business, Mr. Vance," I said softly, echoing a phrase he himself had often used during difficult negotiations or necessary but unpleasant decisions. "Indeed, it is," he acknowledged, picking up my consulting proposal again, his focus returning. "All right, Ava. I'll sign this agreement, and I will personally ensure," he added, his jaw tightening, "that Chadwick fully understands every single term, every expectation, and the severe consequences of violating any part of it, especially the confidentiality clauses." "Thank you, Mr. Vance," I said simply. "But before you leave," he continued, holding up a hand, his expression shifting slightly, becoming more personal, "I want to ask you something. Strictly off the record." I nodded, my curiosity piqued. "Hypothetically speaking," he said, leaning forward slightly, lowering his voice, "what would it realistically take, down the road, perhaps, to bring you back to Vance Industries? Not right now, obviously. But eventually. Once the dust settles, once certain adjustments are made." The question genuinely took me by surprise. "Coming back? After this?" "Honestly, Mr. Vance," I replied after a moment's thought, choosing my words carefully, "I truly don't know if that's possible anymore. Apex Solutions is offering significant opportunities, a different path I hadn't seriously considered before yesterday. And frankly," I added, meeting his gaze directly, "after what happened, after the trust was broken so abruptly, rebuilding that bridge would be incredibly difficult." "Acknowledged," Mr. Vance said quietly, nodding his understanding. Difficult, certainly. But perhaps not impossible. I thought about it for another moment, considering the hypothetical seriously. What would it truly take? Vance Industries would need to fundamentally change, Mr. Vance, I stated plainly. Not just superficially. The culture. The leadership approach. Your son, I continued, would need to unequivocally demonstrate, through consistent actions over time, that he genuinely values the people who make this company successful, not just the quarterly bottom line. He would need to earn their trust, and mine. That's a very tall order. You asked what it would take, I reminded him gently. Mr. Vance suddenly chuckled, a deep, genuine sound that momentarily broke the tension lingering in the room. It felt good to hear it. So I did, Ava. So I did. He stood up and extended his hand across the table. No matter what happens next, whether you come back someday or conquer the world at Apex. It has been a distinct honor and a privilege working with you all these years, Ava. I shook his offered hand firmly, feeling an unexpected surge of warmth and emotion tighten my throat. The end of an era, truly. Likewise, Mr. Vance, I managed, my voice slightly thick. Thank you for everything. As I turned to leave the conference room, ready to face whatever awaited outside, Mr. Vance called after me. Ava. One more thing. I paused at the door, turning back. Chadwick is going to absolutely despise this, he said, a glint of stern amusement in his eyes, but as part of this consulting agreement, I am going to personally insist that he attends every single one of your transition meetings. He needs to sit there, listen, and learn directly from you. Consider it, he added dryly, a mandatory, and likely painful, part of his ongoing executive education. Despite the turmoil of the past 24 hours, I couldn't suppress a small, satisfied smile. That seems entirely appropriate, Mr. Vance. Outside the heavy conference room door, Chadwick was pacing the hallway like a caged tiger. His face still flushed with impotent anger and humiliation. He stopped abruptly when he saw me emerge, his eyes narrowing into slits. Well? Are you satisfied now, Moreau? He demanded bitterly, stepping directly into my path. You've come in here and completely undermined my authority on my second day as CEO. I regarded him calmly, refusing to rise to the bait. My victory was already secured. There was no need for further confrontation. You did that yourself, Chadwick, I replied evenly, my voice quiet but firm. The moment you decided to terminate a senior employee without taking the time to understand the potential consequences or the terms of their legally binding contract. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, lowering his voice to a menacing hiss. This isn't over between us. Not by a long shot. Actually, Chadwick, I replied, matching his low tone, my voice laced with ice, it is. Your father is signing my consulting agreement as we speak. Which means, among other things, that you will be personally attending all transition meetings I conduct over the next few weeks. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Consider it a practical, hands-on crash course in Contract Management 101. Perhaps you'll learn something valuable. The look of pure, unadulterated shock that washed over his face, robbing him of speech, was almost worth the emotional roller coaster of the past 24 hours. Almost. The following Monday morning, I walked confidently into the gleaming, ultramodern headquarters of Apex Solutions. Located in the heart of downtown Cedar Creek. This wasn't just a new job, it felt like stepping into a different world. As their newly appointed Director of Contract Management and Compliance, I was ready for the challenge. My spacious corner office offered panoramic views of the city skyline, a stark, welcome contrast to the functional, windowless interior office I had occupied for years at the more traditional Vance Industries complex. Julian Croft himself gave me the grand tour, personally introducing me to my new team members and key executives, outlining my initial responsibilities and strategic priorities with crisp efficiency. I've been trying to recruit you over to Apex for years, Ava, he admitted with a wry grin as we finally settled into his own minimalist, high-tech office for a cup of coffee later that morning. Though I must confess, he added, his sharp eyes studying me over the rim of his mug, the specific circumstances that finally made it possible are somewhat surprising, even to me. Life, Julian, I replied diplomatically, taking a sip of the excellent coffee, is often full of unexpected turns and unforeseen opportunities. Julian chuckled, a dry, appreciative sound. That's certainly one way of putting it, Ava. He leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from welcoming colleague to shrewd strategist. That consulting arrangement you negotiated with Vance Industries, by the way, that was exceptionally clever. It neatly secures your financial package, allows us to benefit from your transitional expertise, and avoids any messy, protracted legal battles over your exit. Clean. Efficient. I like it. It felt like the right and pragmatic thing to do, I said simply. Mr. Vance built that company from the ground up. He deserved a more orderly transition, regardless of his son's actions. I respect his legacy, even if I fundamentally disagree with the direction Chadwick seems determined to take the company now. Speaking of which, Julian leaned forward again, his expression turning serious, his focus sharpening. Your first official transition meeting back at Vance is scheduled for tomorrow morning, correct? Are you fully prepared for what might be a tense encounter? I nodded confidently. Absolutely. I spent most of the weekend compiling comprehensive, detailed handover notes and documentation for all my active projects and key contractual responsibilities. My sole objective for these sessions, I stated clearly, is to ensure a smooth, professional transfer of knowledge and minimize any disruption to Vance's ongoing operations or client relationships. It's not about creating further problems, it's about responsible closure. And Chadwick. Julian pressed, raising an eyebrow. His mandatory attendance, how do you anticipate he'll handle that? I considered the question for a moment, picturing Chadwick's sullen face. Poorly, at first, I predicted honestly. He'll likely be resentful, obstructionist, looking for ways to undermine the process. But, I added with confidence, Mr. Vance made it clear he expects Chadwick's full cooperation. He'll keep him in line, at least initially. Julian seemed satisfied with my assessment. Good, he said decisively. The last thing either Apex or Vance needs right now is unnecessary public drama or protracted conflict between us. As I settled into my new role at Apex over the next few days, navigating the different corporate culture and building relationships with my team, news of my abrupt departure from Vance Industries and the rather dramatic circumstances surrounding it inevitably spread like wildfire through Cedar Creek's tight-knit business community. Several former colleagues from Vance reached out privately, some expressing shock and offering support, others discreetly inquiring about potential job opportunities at Apex. I maintained a carefully professional and neutral stance, neither actively encouraging defections nor completely closing doors. Simply focusing on my new responsibilities. The first transition meeting back at the familiar Vance Industries conference room was exactly as tense and awkward as I had anticipated. Chadwick sat at the opposite end of the long table, radiating sullen resentment, pointedly avoiding eye contact, and remaining stubbornly silent throughout the entire 2-hour session. I ignored his passive aggression, focusing instead on professionally walking his legal team and relevant department heads through my meticulously prepared handover notes, patiently explaining the complex nuances of major contracts and critical compliance issues they would now need to manage without my oversight. Mr. Vance observed the entire proceeding from his customary position at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, interjecting only occasionally to ask sharp, clarifying questions that demonstrated his continued deep understanding of the business. When the meeting finally concluded, and the clearly relieved Vance team members filed out, Mr. Vance asked me to stay behind for a moment. Ava, he said quietly, once we were alone, his voice low and sincere. Thank you for conducting this properly, professionally. It would have been very easy, understandable even, for you to leave them floundering, given the circumstances. That wouldn't help anyone in the long run, Mr. Vance, I replied simply. Least of all the clients and partners caught in the middle of this internal transition. Mr. Vance nodded slowly, a faint glimmer of his former warmth, mingled with respect, returning to his eyes. Always the consummate professional, Ava, he murmured. Right to the end. Over the next 2 challenging months, I carefully divided my time and energy between establishing myself as a valuable leader at Apex Solutions and diligently fulfilling my contractual consulting obligations back at Vance Industries. The weekly transition meetings gradually became less tense, though never truly comfortable. Slowly, grudgingly, Chadwick seemed to realize the immense practical value of the detailed information and strategic insights I was sharing. He actually began asking pertinent questions, occasionally even taking notes, a stark contrast to the dismissive, arrogant attitude he had displayed on his first day as CEO. He was still arrogant, still clearly resentful of my presence, but a tiny seed of reluctant learning seemed to have been planted. During our final scheduled consulting meeting, as I was gathering my materials, preparing to leave the Vance Industries building for what I assumed would be the very last time, Chadwick approached me directly. He hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. "Moreau," he began, his tone surprisingly measured, almost hesitant. "I underestimated you." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "And I fundamentally misjudged the situation back then." I looked up from my briefcase, genuinely surprised by what sounded suspiciously like the beginnings of an apology, however clumsy. "We all make mistakes, Chadwick," I replied neutrally, offering him a small degree of professional courtesy, especially when we're new to a demanding role. Chadwick frowned slightly, looking dissatisfied with my generic response. "That's what my father keeps saying," he muttered, almost to himself. "But it doesn't excuse my actions." "No," I agreed quietly, meeting his gaze. "It doesn't. But acknowledging the mistake," I added, "is always the necessary first step toward learning from it and, hopefully, not repeating it." He seemed to consider this for a moment, actually absorbing the point. "This consulting agreement officially expires next week, correct?" he asked, shifting topics abruptly. "Yes, that's right," I confirmed. "Would you," he hesitated again, then forced the words out, "would you perhaps consider extending it? On a much more limited, as-needed basis, of course," he added quickly. "Maybe just for consultation on the most complex international contracts? Or emerging regulatory issues." I hadn't expected this request at all. "An extension? After everything?" "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, Chadwick," I replied carefully, "given my permanent senior role at Apex Solutions now. Potential conflicts of interest." "I've already discussed the possibility preliminarily with Julian Croft," Chadwick admitted, cutting me off, surprising me again. He had proactively spoken to Julian? He indicated Apex might be open to it, purely on a case-by-case basis, provided there are extremely clear boundaries and full transparency. This was certainly news to me. Julian hadn't mentioned it. I made a quick mental note to discuss this unexpected development with Julian as soon as I returned to my Apex office. "Why me, Chadwick?" I asked bluntly, curious about his motivation now. There are plenty of other experienced external legal consultants in Cedar Creek with contract expertise. Chadwick's expression was a mixture of reluctance and surprising honesty. "Because," he said quietly, finally meeting my eyes directly, "you already know our business inside and out better than anyone. And because," he added, his voice dropping slightly, swallowing his pride, "I need to prove to my father, and maybe to myself, that I can actually learn from my colossal mistakes." I studied him for a long moment, searching his face for lingering signs of the entitled arrogance that had so starkly characterized our previous interactions. Instead, beneath the surface, I saw something new, something unexpected, a flicker of genuine humility, born perhaps of public humiliation and the harsh realities of leadership. A potential, nascent capacity for growth. "I will give it some thought, Chadwick," I said finally, offering no promises. "That's all I can commit to right now." Chadwick nodded slowly, accepting this small, partial victory with more grace than I expected. "That's fair," he acknowledged quietly. "Thank you, Ava." He used my first name. A small sign, perhaps, but significant. As I walked out of the Vance Industries headquarters building and into the late afternoon sun, possibly for the last time, I reflected on how dramatically, how unexpectedly, things had turned out compared to that initial, brutal dismissal just 2 months prior. I had walked away from Vance not just with substantial financial compensation secured by my foresight, but with my professional reputation enhanced throughout the industry, and now, astonishingly, with a grudging measure of newfound respect from the very person who had so carelessly tried to end my career there. Meanwhile, at Apex Solutions, I was not just surviving, I was thriving. My intimate, nuanced understanding of Vance Industries' operations, strategies, and weaknesses knowledge ethically acquired during my tenure had already allowed me to identify several key strategic opportunities for Apex to strengthen its own client relationships and significantly improve its competitive positioning and contract structures. Julian Croft was clearly pleased with my immediate impact, and I had already been entrusted with additional responsibilities beyond my initial role. Integrating quickly into the senior leadership team, the executive severance agreement, the document Chadwick Vance III had failed to read, failed to understand, failed to respect, had irrevocably changed the trajectory of my career, opening doors and creating possibilities I never could have anticipated just a few months earlier. Sometimes, I reflected, allowing myself a small, private smile as I headed towards my car. The most powerful form of revenge isn't about actively tearing someone down. Sometimes, it's simply about rising so high, achieving such undeniable success on your own terms, that they have no choice but to look up at you from the wreckage they created. My battle with Chadwick Vance was over. My future was just beginning.